Chapter 1. The Dirge of Dead Stars. The wind howled a mournful dirge around the skeletal remains of the derelict space station, a symphony of despair that resonated deep within my bones. Or perhaps it was simply the echo of my own terror, amplified by the vast, uncaring void. I hugged myself tighter, the thin fabric of my scavenged envirosuit offering little comfort against the biting cold that seemed to seep into everything, even my thoughts. I was alone, adrift in a metal tomb orbiting a dying star, and the silence, punctuated only by the groaning of twisted metal and the hiss of failing life support, was a torment all its own. My name is Elias Thorn, or at least that's the name I cling to. Names have a way of fatting out here. I'm a scavenger, a rat in the cosmic junkyard, picking at the scraps of a forgotten era. I've spent the last 5 years of my life drifting between these derelicts, these silent monuments to human ambition and hubris, searching for anything of value, spare parts, functional tech, maybe even a ration pack that hasn't turned to dust. The pay is shit, the risk is astronomical, and the company is, well, non-existent, but it's a living of sorts, better than starving on the dust-choked colonies anyway. This station, designated Kepler-62e Research Hub, was supposed to be my jackpot. According to the fragmented data logs I'd managed to piece together from a dead freighter's computer, Kepler-62e was a cutting-edge research facility dedicated to studying something. The logs were corrupted, filled with static and redacted files, but the whispers I gleaned hinted at something groundbreaking, something terrifying. Enough to make it worth risking the jump out to this forgotten corner of the galaxy. The initial scans showed minimal life support, damaged but potentially salvageable. A risky proposition, but the potential rewards outweighed the danger. Or so I told myself. Now, 3 days in, with the life support flickering like a dying candle and the station's oppressive atmosphere weighing on me like a shroud, I was starting to question my judgment. The architecture was unsettling from the moment I'd breached the outer hull. The corridors were too narrow, the ceilings too low, creating a claustrophobic maze that seemed designed to disorient. Every junction was a maddening repetition of the last, each identical turn leading to another identical corridor. It was as if the station itself was mocking me, leading me on a pointless chase through its metallic bowels. I consulted the hastily drawn map I'd cobbled together from the station's fragmented schematics. Level 3, Sector 7, the biolabs, my primary target. If the rumors were true, the biolabs held the key to Kepler-62e's secrets and potentially a fortune in unreleased research. The air grew colder as I descended deeper into the station, the recycled oxygen tinged with a metallic tang that stung my nostrils. The flickering emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows that played tricks on my eyes. I could have sworn I saw movement in the periphery, fleeting glimpses of figures lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. But when I turned to look, there was nothing, just the empty corridors and the whispering silence. The further I went, the more evident that something terrible had happened here. Scorch marks scarred the walls, twisted metal lay scattered across the floors, and the air grew heavy with the unmistakable scent of decay. Not the clean, sterile decay of a long-abandoned station, but the rancid, cloying stench of something organic. I pressed on, my pulse pounding in my ears, each step echoing unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. My hand rested on the hilt of my plasma cutter, my only defense against whatever horrors might lurk in the darkness. Finally, I reached Sector 7. The entrance to the biolabs was sealed by a reinforced blast door, its surface scarred and blackened by what looked like concentrated plasma fire. A chilling testament to the desperation of those who had tried to contain whatever lay beyond. A control panel was set into the wall beside the door, its surface cracked and corroded. I ran a diagnostic scan with my multi-tool. The panel was fried, the internal circuitry fused into a useless mess. The door wouldn't open without a manual override. I sighed, the sound echoing hollowly in my helmet. This was going to be difficult. I activated my plasma cutter, The humming whine of the energy blade a stark contrast to the oppressive silence. With a steady hand, I began to cut through the blast door, the superheated plasma melting through the reinforced steel with agonizing slowness. Sparks flew, illuminating the corridor in brief, blinding flashes. The air grew thick with the acrid smell of burning metal. It took what felt like an eternity, but finally, the last section of the door buckled and fell away with a deafening crash. I stepped through the opening, my heart pounding in my chest. The biolabs were different, colder, darker, and filled with a palpable sense of dread that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The room was vast, a cavernous space filled with rows upon rows of stasis pods, their glass surfaces clouded with condensation. Most were empty, but a few still contained something. Distorted shapes, grotesque parodies of human anatomy floating in a viscous green fluid. My stomach churned. This wasn't research, this was abomination. A low hum resonated from the depths of the lab, a rhythmic pulse that vibrated through the floor and into my very soul. I followed the sound, my plasma cutter held high, my senses on full alert. The hum grew louder as I approached the far end of the lab, leading me to a massive, cylindrical chamber that dominated the room. The chamber was made of some kind of transparent material, its surface shimmering with an iridescent glow. Inside, suspended in a swirling vortex of crimson fluid, I couldn't even begin to describe it. It was a creature of nightmare, a grotesque fusion of flesh and metal, its body a writhing mass of tentacles and limbs. Its head was vaguely humanoid, but its face was a mask of pure, unadulterated horror, its eyes burning with an intelligence that chilled me to the core. It was alive, and it was looking at me. A voice, cold and alien, echoed in my mind. "You have come to witness the dawn. You have come to witness perfection." I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't just a research facility. It was a prison, and I had just released the monster. I should run. I knew that with every fiber of my being. Get back to my ship, get out of here, and never look back. But I couldn't. I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear and a morbid curiosity that I couldn't explain. The creature began to stir, its tentacles unfurling, its metal limbs flexing. The crimson fluid swirled around it, becoming thicker, darker, as if the chamber itself was bleeding. "We have waited so long," the voice echoed in my mind. "So long to be free, and now you have opened the door." The chamber began to crack, hairline fractures spiderwebbing across its surface. The humming intensified, reaching a fever pitch that threatened to shatter my eardrums. I knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that I was about to witness something terrible, something that would forever haunt my dreams, something that would change me irrevocably. The chamber shattered, and the monster was unleashed. Chapter 2: Unleashed in the Biolabs. The shattering of the containment chamber was like the breaking of a dam, unleashing a torrent of crimson fluid and raw, untamed power that washed over me in a wave of icy dread. I stumbled back, shielding my face as shards of the shattered chamber rained down around me, each fragment humming with residual energy. The creature emerged from the wreckage, a towering behemoth of flesh and metal that defied all natural laws. Its tentacles writhed and pulsed, dripping with the crimson fluid that clung to its metallic limbs like a second skin. Its eyes, burning with an unholy light, locked onto me, and I felt a cold, probing presence invading my mind. "Fear," the voice echoed, laced with amusement. "It is a delicious nectar, feed me more." I tried to move, to run, but my limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. The creature's presence was a suffocating blanket pressing down on me, stealing my will. I was trapped, a rabbit caught in the gaze of a predator. It took a step, its metallic limbs grinding against the floor, each movement sending tremors through the station. The sound was deafening, a monstrous symphony of destruction that reverberated through the corridors. I finally managed to break free from its paralyzing gaze, my survival instincts kicking in. I scrambled backward, fumbling for my plasma cutter, my fingers slick with sweat. I activated the blade, the familiar hum a small comfort in the face of overwhelming terror. A futile gesture, the creature's voice boomed in my mind, but amusing nonetheless. It lunged, its tentacles lashing out with blinding speed. I barely managed to raise my plasma cutter in defense, the energy blade slicing through the tentacles with a searing hiss. But the creature was too fast, too strong. One of its metallic limbs slammed into me, sending me flying across the lab. I crashed into a bank of stasis pods, the impact shattering the glass and sending shards of glass and preservative fluid spraying across the room. Pain exploded in my chest, stealing my breath. I lay gasping on the floor, my vision blurring, my body screaming in protest. The creature loomed over me, its shadow engulfing me in darkness. "You cannot comprehend what you have unleashed," it said, its voice laced with a chilling arrogance. "This station, this galaxy, will tremble before my might." I struggled to my feet, my body trembling, my mind racing. I had to do something, anything, to stop this monster. But what? I was just a scavenger, a nobody, armed with nothing but a plasma cutter and a handful of useless tools. I looked around the lab, my eyes scanning the wreckage for anything that could give me an edge. My gaze fell on a console near the far wall, its surface flickering with residual power. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. I bolted, dodging the creature's grasping tentacles, my movements clumsy and desperate. It roared in frustration, its rage palpable, its power immense. I reached the console, my fingers flying across the damaged surface, trying to bypass the security protocols. The creature was closing in, its footsteps shaking the floor. "Do you think you can stop me?" it taunted. "I am beyond your comprehension. I am inevitable." I ignored its words, focusing all my energy on the console. I needed to find something, anything, that could slow it down, even for a few seconds. Finally, a program flickered to life on the screen. Emergency lockdown protocol. It was a long shot, but it was worth a try. I initiated the program, the console humming as it sent a signal throughout the station. Alarms blared to life, their deafening wails echoing through the corridors. Blast doors slammed shut, sealing off sectors and compartments, attempting to contain the creature within the biolabs. The creature roared in fury, its tentacles thrashing against the closing blast doors, its metallic limbs tearing through the reinforced steel. It was too late. The doors slammed shut, sealing it within the lab. For now. I collapsed against the console, gasping for breath, my body shaking with adrenaline. I had bought myself some time, but I knew it wouldn't last. The creature was too powerful, too intelligent. It would find a way out. I had to get off this station, now. I turned and fled, retracing my steps through the wreckage-strewn corridors, my heart pounding in my ears. The alarms were still blaring, their incessant wails a constant reminder of the impending doom. As I ran, I noticed something strange. The station was changing. The corridors seemed to be shifting, the walls were closing in, the architecture twisting into bizarre, impossible angles. It was as if the station itself was alive, reacting to the creature's presence, warping around it, becoming a living nightmare. The emergency lights flickered and died, plunging the corridors into darkness. I activated my helmet light, its beam cutting through the gloom, revealing the grotesque reality of the station's transformation. The walls were covered in a pulsating, organic growth, a network of veins and tendrils that seemed to be alive. The air grew thick with the cloying stench of decay, the smell intensifying with each passing moment. The station was becoming infected. I stumbled onward, my mind reeling, my sanity fraying at the edges. I had to escape. I had to get off this station before it consumed me, body and soul. As I rounded a corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Standing at the end of the corridor, bathed in the eerie glow of the pulsating walls, was a figure. It was human, or at least it had been. Its skin was stretched tight against its bones, its eyes hollow and black, its mouth twisted into a grotesque parody of a smile. Its body was covered in the same organic growth that infested the station, the veins and tendrils pulsing beneath its skin. It raised a hand, its fingers elongated and sharpened into claws. "Welcome," it said, its voice a raspy whisper that echoed in my mind. "We have been waiting for you." I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I wasn't alone on this station. The creature wasn't the only monster lurking in the darkness, and I had just stumbled into its trap. Chapter 3: The Infected. The sight of the corrupted human, the grotesque parody of life that stood before me, sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated terror through my veins. My instincts screamed at me to run, to flee as far and as fast as I could, but my feet were rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. The creature, for that's all it could be considered now, glided forward, its movements fluid and unnatural, its clawed hand outstretched. The organic growth that covered its body pulsed with an eerie luminescence, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the corridor walls. "Do not be afraid," it whispered, its voice a grating rasp that scraped against my sanity. "We are all one here. We are all connected." I finally managed to break free from my paralysis, stumbling backward, my plasma cutter raised in a shaky hand. "Stay away from me," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. The creature chuckled, a dry, rattling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You cannot escape your destiny," it said. "You are already part of us. You simply haven't realized it yet." It lunged, its movements impossibly fast, its clawed hand reaching for my face. I reacted on instinct, slashing out with my plasma cutter, the energy blade searing through the air. The blade connected, slicing through the creature's arm with a sizzling hiss. But instead of pain, its face twisted into a look of ecstasy. The organic growth around the wound pulsed with renewed vigor, quickly sealing the severed limb. "Thank you," it whispered, its eyes gleaming with a malevolent light. "You have made me stronger." I realized with a sickening certainty that I couldn't fight it. The creature wasn't just infected, it was enhanced. The organic growth was feeding off my attacks, making it stronger, more resilient. I had to find another way. I turned and ran, fleeing in the opposite direction, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature pursued, its footsteps echoing behind me, its voice taunting me relentlessly. "Where do you think you're going?" it called out. "There is nowhere to run. This station is our domain now, and you are our prey." I sprinted through the twisting corridors, my mind racing, desperately searching for a way out. The station was a maze, its architecture warped and distorted by the alien presence. Every turn led to another dead end, another grotesque manifestation of the infection. I could hear the creature gaining on me, its footsteps growing louder, its voice closer. I risked a glance over my shoulder. It was still behind me, but it was moving faster now, its movements more fluid, more evolved. The organic growth had spread further across its body, covering its face, obscuring its features. It was becoming something else, something monstrous. I burst through a doorway, slamming the emergency seal shut behind me. The door hissed and locked, sealing the corridor. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath, my body shaking with exhaustion. It wouldn't hold for long. The creature was too strong. I looked around the room. It was a small, cramped space filled with rows of lockers, a maintenance closet perhaps. I frantically searched the lockers, hopping to find something, anything that could help me. Most were empty, but one contained a maintenance suit, similar to my own but older, more worn. I ignored it, continuing my search. In the last locker I found something that made my heart leap with hope. A hangul koniun enus hangul ko enus hangul ko enus hangul ko enus hangul ko enus ko nulgun enus, but still functional plasma rifle. I grabbed the rifle, hefting it in my hands. It was heavy, unwieldy, but it was better than nothing. I checked the power cell. It was almost depleted, but there was still enough charge for a few shots. The blast door behind me buckled and groaned, the metal twisting and warping under the creature's relentless assault. It was about to break through. I braced myself, leveling the plasma rifle at the door, my finger on the trigger. I would take it down or die trying. The door shattered, sending shards of metal flying across the room. The creature stepped through the opening, its form now almost completely obscured by the organic growth. It was no longer human. It was something alien. "You cannot defeat me," it hissed, its voice a guttural growl. "I am the future, I am evolution." I didn't respond. I simply squeezed the trigger. The plasma rifle roared, unleashing a bolt of superheated energy that slammed into the creature's chest. The organic growth sizzled and burned, the creature recoiling in pain. But it wasn't enough. The creature was too resilient. The plasma bolt had only slowed it down, not stopped it. It lunged, its clawed hands reaching for me. I fired again and again, each blast searing through the creature's flesh, but it kept coming, its rage fueled by the pain. I was running out of power. The rifle sputtered and died, the power cell completely depleted. The creature was upon me, its shadow engulfing me, its claws reaching for my throat. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the end. But it never came. Instead, I heard a deafening roar, a sound that dwarfed even the creature's rage. The station shook violently, the walls groaning and creaking under some immense pressure. The creature recoiled, its attention diverted by the sudden disturbance. It turned its head, its eyes widening with fear. "What is happening?" it hissed, its voice laced with uncertainty. Before I could answer, the ceiling above us collapsed, sending a torrent of twisted metal and organic growth crashing down into the room. I scrambled out of the way, dodging the falling debris, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature was not so lucky. It was buried beneath the wreckage, its struggles muffled by the weight of the debris. I didn't waste any time. I turned and fled, scrambling through the wreckage-strewn corridors, my only thought to escape. Something was happening to the station, something catastrophic, and I didn't want to be around to find out what it was. As I ran, I heard the creature roar again, its voice filled with rage and frustration. It was still alive, and it was digging its way out. I had to get to my ship, now. Chapter 4: Garden of the Lost. The station was tearing itself apart. Corridors buckled and collapsed, gravity fluctuated wildly, and the air grew thick with the stench of decay and the metallic tang of spilled coolant. Every step was a gamble, every breath a risk. The emergency lights, flickering intermittently, cast grotesque shadows that danced across the walls, turning familiar passageways into terrifying labyrinths. I stumbled through the chaos, my mind focused on one thing: reaching my ship. The Stardust Drifter wasn't much, a battered freighter with more patches than hull plating, but it was my ticket out of this nightmare. As I navigated the collapsing corridors, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking presence. Every groan of metal sounded like a whispered threat. I knew the corrupted humans were still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for an opportunity to strike. And then there was the creature. I hadn't seen it since the ceiling collapsed, but I could feel its presence, a cold, malevolent energy that permeated the station. I knew it was still alive, still searching for me, its rage growing with each passing moment. I reached a junction, the path ahead blocked by a collapsed section of the ceiling. I cursed under my breath, my frustration mounting. I didn't have time for this. I searched for another route, my eyes scanning the wreckage for a way through. I spotted a narrow opening, a gap between two twisted metal beams, just large enough to squeeze through. I hesitated. The opening was dark, claustrophobic, and I had no idea what lay on the other side. But I had no choice. I was running out of time. I squeezed through the opening, scraping my suit against the jagged metal. The passage was tight, barely wide enough to move. I crawled forward, my heart pounding in my chest, my senses on high alert. The passage twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the bowels of the station. The air grew thick and heavy, the stench of decay almost unbearable. I could feel the organic growth pulsating around me, its tendrils brushing against my skin. Suddenly, the passage opened into a large chamber. The room was dimly lit by a flickering emergency light, revealing a scene of unimaginable horror. The chamber was filled with bodies. Human bodies, twisted and contorted, impaled on spikes of metal and organic growth. Their faces were frozen in expressions of terror, their eyes wide and vacant. It was a charnel house, a grotesque monument to the creature's power. I recoiled in horror, my stomach churning. I wanted to turn away, to flee from this nightmare, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place, mesmerized by the carnage. As I stared at the bodies, I noticed something strange. They were moving, slowly, subtly, but undeniably moving. Their limbs twitched, their heads lolled, their eyes flickered. They were still alive, or at least they weren't completely dead. The organic growth that covered their bodies pulsed and writhed, connecting them to the station, turning them into living puppets. "Welcome to the garden," a voice whispered in my mind. "Here we nurture new life. Here we become one." I recognized the voice. It was the creature. It was here. I turned around, my plasma cutter raised, my heart pounding in my chest. The creature stood at the far end of the chamber, its form almost completely obscured by the organic growth. It was a towering monstrosity, a grotesque fusion of flesh and metal, its eyes burning with an unholy light. "You cannot escape me," it said, its voice a chilling growl. "You are already part of the garden. You simply haven't realized it yet." The bodies around me began to stir, their limbs twitching more violently, their eyes focusing on me. They were coming to life. I was surrounded. I had to fight. I had to survive. I raised my plasma cutter, preparing to unleash its energy on the horde of living corpses that were closing in on me. But then something unexpected happened. One of the bodies, a woman with long, tangled hair, turned her head and looked at me. Her eyes, though vacant and lifeless, seemed to recognize me. "Elias," she whispered, her voice weak and strained. "Help me." I froze, my finger hovering over the trigger. I knew that woman. I recognized her. It was Dr. Eris Thorne, my mother. She had been assigned to Kepler-62e, and I never knew what happened to her after the incident. "Mother," I whispered, my voice trembling with disbelief. "Elias," she repeated, her eyes pleading, "please end this." I lowered my plasma cutter, my heart breaking. I couldn't kill her. I couldn't kill any of them. They were victims, trapped in this nightmare, their bodies and minds controlled by the creature. But what choice did I have? If I didn't kill them, they would kill me. And then I would become one of them, a living puppet, trapped in this grotesque garden forever. The other bodies were closing in, their movements becoming more aggressive, their groans turning into snarls. They were about to attack. I had to make a decision. A moral dilemma, sacrifice one to save many. Chapter 5, A Mother's Plea. The weight of the decision pressed down on me, a crushing burden that threatened to suffocate me. My mother's pleading eyes, filled with a desperate plea for release, were seared into my mind. Could I condemn her to this agonizing existence? Could I bring myself to end her life, even in this twisted, corrupted form? The other bodies, their movements jerky and unnatural, were closing in, their decaying hands reaching for me. They were no longer human, but the remnants of their former selves still lingered, trapped within the prison of their transformed flesh. The creature watched from the shadows, its malevolent presence radiating outwards, feeding on my fear and indecision. "A difficult choice, isn't it?" it hissed, its voice dripping with amusement. "But do not worry, Elias, the decision will be made for you." It gestured with a clawed hand, and the bodies surged forward, their snarls turning into guttural roars. They were upon me, their decaying flesh brushing against my suit, their cold, dead hands grasping at my limbs. I cried out in despair, my resolve crumbling. I couldn't do it. I couldn't kill them. I couldn't kill my mother. But then I saw something. A flicker of recognition in my mother's eyes, a moment of lucidity amidst the madness. She reached out to me, her hand trembling, her fingers brushing against my helmet. "Remember," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the snarling of the other bodies. "Remember what you are. Remember what you must do." And then her eyes cleared, her gaze hardening with determination. She looked at me not with pleading but with resolve. "Do it, Elias," she said, her voice firm and clear. "End this nightmare, end me." Her words were like a jolt of electricity, snapping me out of my paralysis. I knew what I had to do. It wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. I raised my plasma cutter, my hand trembling, my heart breaking. I focused on my mother's face, trying to remember her as she was, before the infection, before the horror. "I'm sorry, Mother," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I love you." And then I squeezed the trigger. The plasma cutter roared, unleashing its energy on my mother's body. The organic growth sizzled and burned, her flesh dissolving into ash. She let out a final, mournful sigh, and then she was gone, her body collapsing into a heap on the floor. The other bodies recoiled, their movements faltering, their connection to the creature weakened by my act. They were still alive, but their aggression had diminished, their threat lessened. I didn't waste any time. I turned my attention to the remaining bodies, my plasma cutter blazing. I moved quickly, efficiently, ending their suffering with swift, merciful blows. Each death was a tragedy, a reminder of the horrors that had befallen this station. But with each death, the creature's power diminished, its presence weakening. Finally, the last body fell, its organic growth withering, its connection to the creature severed. The chamber was silent, the air heavy with the stench of death and the lingering echo of my grief. I stood in the center of the carnage, my body trembling, my mind reeling. I had done what I had to do, but the cost was immense. I had killed my mother. I had killed dozens of innocent people, and I would never be the same. The creature watched from the shadows, its rage palpable, its power diminished but not broken. "You have made a grave mistake, Elias," it hissed, its voice laced with venom. "You have defied me, and for that you will suffer." It raised its clawed hand, and the walls of the chamber began to close in, the organic growth pulsing with renewed vigor. The station was turning against me, its corridors twisting and shifting, its architecture collapsing around me. I had to escape, now. I turned and ran, fleeing from the Chamber of Horrors, my mind focused on one thing: reaching my ship. As I navigated the collapsing corridors, I knew that the creature was still out there, hunting me, its rage growing with each passing moment. But I was no longer afraid. I had faced my greatest fear. I had made the ultimate sacrifice. And now I was ready to fight. As I rounded a corner, I saw something that made my heart sink. The corridor ahead was blocked by a massive wall of organic growth, its tendrils pulsing and writhing, its surface impenetrable. There was no way through. I was trapped. The creature laughed, its voice echoing through the corridors. "There is nowhere to run, Elias," it said. "This station is my domain now, and you are mine." I was surrounded, I was trapped, I was doomed. Or was I? I looked around the corridor, my eyes scanning the walls for any sign of escape. And then I saw it. A small ventilation shaft, barely large enough to squeeze through, hidden behind a twisted metal beam. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. I scrambled towards the ventilation shaft, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to reach it before the creature caught me. But as I approached the shaft, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A clicking, scuttling sound, coming from the darkness behind me. I turned around, my plasma cutter raised, my heart leaping into my throat. Standing at the end of the corridor, its eyes gleaming in the darkness, was something that made my skin crawl. It was a spider, a giant spider, its body covered in the same organic growth that infested the station. And it was coming for me. Chapter 6: Arachnid Terror. The sight of the monstrous spider, its 8 eyes gleaming with predatory hunger, sent a wave of primal fear crashing over me. Arachnophobia had always been a lurking demon in the back of my mind, a phobia I'd mostly managed to keep at bay. But here, in the claustrophobic confines of the dying space station, facing a spider the size of a small vehicle, the fear was overwhelming, paralyzing. Its legs clicked and scraped against the metal floor, each sound amplifying the dread that coiled in my stomach. The organic growth that covered its body pulsed with an unsettling rhythm, its tendrils twitching and writhing like living things. "Another of my children," the creature's voice echoed in my mind, laced with amusement. "A fitting end for one who fears the shadows." The spider scuttled forward, its movements unnervingly swift, its fangs dripping with a viscous green fluid. I knew that fluid was toxic, capable of dissolving flesh and bone in seconds. I had to move, I had to escape. I forced myself to break free from my paralysis, stumbling towards the ventilation shaft, my heart pounding in my chest. The spider was gaining on me, its clicking legs growing louder, its shadow looming larger. I reached the ventilation shaft, my fingers grasping at the metal grate. I ripped it free, the metal screeching in protest, the sound deafening in the confines of the corridor. The opening was small, barely large enough to squeeze through. I hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the spider. It was almost upon me, its fangs dripping, its eyes burning with hunger. I had no choice. I plunged into the ventilation shaft, squeezing through the narrow opening, my body scraping against the metal. The shaft was dark, cramped, and filled with the stench of dust and decay. I crawled forward, my hands and knees scraping against the rough metal, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The spider was right behind me, its clicking legs echoing in the shaft, its presence a suffocating weight on my back. The ventilation shaft twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the bowels of the station. The air grew thicker, the stench more pungent, the darkness more profound. I had no idea where I was going, but I knew I had to keep moving. I crawled for what felt like an eternity, my body aching, my mind numb. The spider was still behind me, its presence a constant reminder of the danger I was in. Suddenly, the ventilation shaft opened into a larger chamber. I crawled out of the shaft, collapsing onto the floor, gasping for breath. The chamber was dimly lit by a flickering emergency light, revealing a scene that made my blood run cold. The room was filled with webs, thick, sticky webs, spun from the same organic growth that infested the station. The webs covered the walls, the floor, the ceiling, turning the chamber into a grotesque cocoon. And caught in the webs were bodies, human bodies wrapped in cocoons of organic growth, their faces contorted in expressions of silent terror. It was a spider's lair, a charnel house where the monstrous arachnid feasted on its victims. I recoiled in horror, my stomach churning. I had to get out of here. But as I turned to flee, I saw something that made my heart sink. The spider was here. It stood at the far end of the chamber, its 8 eyes gleaming in the darkness, its fangs dripping with venom. It was waiting for me. "Welcome to my web," the creature's voice echoed in my mind, laced with triumph. "Here you will become one with the garden. Here you will find peace." The spider scuttled forward, its movements impossibly swift, its fangs bared. It was ready to claim its next victim. I had to fight, I had to survive. But how? I was trapped in its lair, surrounded by its webs, facing a monster that preyed on my deepest fears. I had nothing left. Or did I? I looked around the chamber, my eyes scanning the walls for any sign of hope, and then I saw it. A small metal container hanging on the wall labeled, "Highly flammable." It was a container of fuel, used for the station's emergency generators. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. I scrambled towards the container, dodging the spider's attacks, my movements clumsy and desperate. The spider was gaining on me, its clicking legs growing louder, its shadow looming larger. I reached the container, my fingers grasping at the release lever. I pulled it down, the lever snapping free, the container hissing as the fuel began to spray into the air. The chamber was filling with a volatile mist, the air thick with the scent of gasoline. The spider hesitated, its eyes narrowing, its senses detecting the danger. It knew what I was planning. "You wouldn't," the creature's voice echoed in my mind, laced with disbelief. I didn't respond. I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out my lighter. The spider recoiled, its eyes widening with terror. "No," the creature shrieked, its voice filled with desperation. I flicked the lighter, the flame igniting with a small, satisfying click. And then I threw it. The lighter sailed through the air, landing in the middle of the fuel-soaked chamber. The world exploded. Chapter 7: Inferno of the Scavenger. The explosion ripped through the chamber with the force of a supernova. The volatile fuel ignited in a blinding flash of fire, incinerating the spider's lair in a heartbeat. The heat was intense, searing my skin even through the protective layers of my envirosuit. The force of the blast threw me backwards, slamming me against the wall of the ventilation shaft. I blacked out for a moment, the world dissolving into a swirling vortex of fire and pain. When I came to, my head was ringing, my body was aching, and the chamber was a raging inferno. The webs were gone, consumed by the flames. The bodies were gone, reduced to ashes. The spider was also gone. I crawled out of the ventilation shaft, my lungs burning, my eyes watering. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of burnt flesh. The station was groaning and creaking, the walls buckling under the strain of the explosion. I had survived, but at what cost? I staggered to my feet, my body trembling, my mind reeling. The explosion had weakened the creature's hold on the station, its presence diminished, its voice fainter. But I knew it was still out there, waiting for me, its rage fueled by my defiance. I had to get to my ship, now. I turned and fled, retracing my steps through the wreckage-strewn corridors, my heart pounding in my chest. The station was collapsing around me, the walls twisting and shifting, the ceiling threatening to cave in at any moment. As I ran, I noticed something different. The organic growth was receding, its tendrils withering, its pulsating glow fading. The station was healing, slowly but surely, as the creature's power waned. But the corrupted humans were still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for an opportunity to strike. I had to be careful. I reached a junction, the path ahead blocked by a collapsed section of the ceiling. I searched for another route, my eyes scanning the wreckage for a way through. And then I saw it. A familiar figure standing in the shadows, its eyes gleaming in the darkness. It was one of the corrupted humans, its body covered in the withered remnants of the organic growth, its face twisted into a grotesque parody of a smile. But this wasn't just any corrupted human. This was Rylan Voss, my former partner. Rylan and I had been scavenging together for years, drifting between derelicts, sharing the risks and the rewards. We were more than just partners, we were friends. But that was before Kepler-62e. That was before the infection. "Elias," Rylan said, his voice a raspy whisper, "I've been waiting for you." I froze, my plasma cutter raised, my heart sinking. I didn't want to fight Rylan. I didn't want to kill him. But I knew I had to. He was no longer Rylan. He was just another puppet of the creature, another obstacle in my path to escape. "Rylan," I said, my voice trembling with grief, "I'm sorry I have to do this." Rylan chuckled, a dry, rattling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Don't be sorry, Elias," he said. "I'm already dead now. Join me." He lunged, his movements swift and unnatural, his clawed hands reaching for my throat. I reacted on instinct, slashing out with my plasma cutter, the energy blade searing through the air. The blade connected, slicing through Rylan's arm with a sizzling hiss. But instead of pain, his face twisted into a look of ecstasy. "Thank you," he whispered, his eyes gleaming with a malevolent light. "You have freed me." And then his body dissolved into ash, his essence released from the creature's control. I stood there for a moment, staring at the pile of ash that was once my friend, my heart breaking. I had killed Rylan. I had killed another innocent person. The weight of my actions was crushing me. I didn't know how much more I could take. "Enough!" The creature's voice roared in my mind, its rage palpable. "You have defied me for the last time. Now, you will pay." The station began to shake violently, the walls groaning and creaking, the ceiling threatening to collapse. The creature was unleashing its full power, tearing the station apart, trying to bury me alive. I had to get out of here, now. I turned and ran, fleeing through the collapsing corridors, my mind focused on one thing: reaching my ship. As I ran, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A wet, squelching sound, coming from the darkness behind me. I turned around, my plasma cutter raised, my heart leaping into my throat. Standing at the end of the corridor, its form shifting and changing, its presence radiating malevolent power, was the creature. It was no longer a grotesque fusion of flesh and metal. It was something else, something beyond comprehension. It was the essence of the station itself, given form, its power amplified by the chaos and destruction. It was the ultimate horror. And it was coming for me. Chapter 8: The Essence of the Station. The creature that stood before me was unlike anything I could have ever imagined. It was no longer confined to a single form, no longer a grotesque fusion of flesh and metal. It had transcended its physical limitations, becoming something more. It was a living embodiment of the station itself, its essence woven into the very fabric of the structure, its power amplified by the chaos and destruction that surrounded us. The corridor around it warped and twisted, the walls pulsating with organic growth, the emergency lights flickering and dying, plunging the space into an eerie, pulsating darkness. The air crackled with energy, the stench of decay mingled with the metallic tang of ozone. The creature shifted and changed, its form fluid and ever-evolving. One moment it was a towering behemoth of metal and flesh, the next it was a swirling vortex of energy, the next it was a swarm of insects, their chitinous bodies clicking and scuttling against the metal floor. It was a kaleidoscope of horror, a reflection of my deepest fears, a manifestation of the station's corrupted soul. "You cannot escape me, Elias," its voice echoed in my mind, no longer a guttural growl but a chorus of whispers, a cacophony of voices that spoke from every corner of my consciousness. "I am the station. I am the air you breathe. I am the darkness that surrounds you. I am inevitable." I stood frozen, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of its presence. My plasma cutter felt useless, a pathetic weapon against a being of such immense power. I knew with a chilling certainty that I couldn't fight it, I couldn't defeat it. It was too powerful, too all-encompassing. But I couldn't give up. I had come too far, I had sacrificed too much. I had to try. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus, to push back against the creature's oppressive presence. I had to find a weakness, an opening, a way to strike back against this monstrous being. I looked around the corridor, my eyes scanning the walls for any sign of hope, and then I saw it. A small, unassuming panel tucked away in a corner labeled Core System Override. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. I bolted, sprinting towards the panel, dodging the creature's shifting forms, my movements clumsy and desperate. The creature roared in frustration, its power unleashed, tearing the station apart around me. The corridor twisted and shifted, the walls closing in, the ceiling collapsing. Debris rained down around me, threatening to crush me at any moment. I reached the panel, my fingers flying across the damaged surface, trying to bypass the security protocols. The creature was closing in, its shifting forms blocking my path, its presence a suffocating weight on my back. I ignored its taunts, focusing all my energy on the panel. I needed to find something, anything, that could disrupt the creature's connection to the station, to weaken its power, to give me a chance to escape. Finally, a program flickered to life on the screen. Reactor scramble sequence. It was a suicide mission. Initiating the sequence would overload the station's reactor, destroying everything within a several-kilometer radius, including me. But it was the only way. It was the only way to stop the creature. It was the only way to save anyone else from suffering the same fate as the crew of Kepler-62e. I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over the activation button. Was I willing to sacrifice myself to destroy this monster? Was I willing to condemn myself to oblivion? I thought of my mother, her pleading eyes, her final words. I thought of Rylan, his twisted smile, his desperate plea for release. I thought of all the innocent people who had died on this station, their lives consumed by the creature's insatiable hunger. And then I made my decision. I slammed my finger down on the activation button. The panel flashed red, alarms blared to life, and a voice echoed through the station. Warning, reactor scramble sequence initiated. All personnel evacuate immediately. The creature roared in fury, its power unleashed, tearing the station apart with unprecedented force. The corridor collapsed around me, burying me beneath a mountain of twisted metal and organic growth. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the end. But it never came. Instead, I felt a strange sensation, a feeling of lightness, of freedom. The creature's presence was receding, its power diminishing, its voice fading into the distance. I opened my eyes and I saw nothing. I was floating in a void, a vast, empty expanse of darkness. There was no station, no creature, no pain, no fear. There was only nothing. Had I died, was this the afterlife? Or was it something else? Suddenly, a light appeared in the distance, a small, flickering beacon in the vast darkness. I drifted towards the light, drawn to it by an irresistible force. As I approached, the light grew brighter, revealing a familiar shape. It was my ship, the Stardust Drifter. It was waiting for me. Had I escaped? Had I survived? Or was this just another illusion, another trick of the creature's twisted mind? I had to find out. I reached the Stardust Drifter, my hand grasping at the familiar hull plating. The ship hummed to life, its engines sputtering to life, its lights flickering on. The hatch opened, revealing a familiar figure standing in the doorway. It was me. But it wasn't me. It was something else. Something sinister. Something terrifying. It smiled, a grotesque parody of a human expression, its eyes burning with an unholy light. "Welcome home, Elias," it said, its voice a chilling whisper. "We've been waiting for you." The Stardust Drifter, my escape, my freedom, was a trap, and I had just walked right into it. Chapter 9: Mirror of Madness. The doppelganger that stood before me in the doorway of the Stardust Drifter was a perfect mirror image, yet utterly alien. Every detail was precise: the worn flight suit, the familiar scar above my left eye, even the nervous tic I had when under stress. But the eyes, those were not my eyes. They burned with an intelligence that was both ancient and malevolent, a cold, calculating gaze that saw right through me. A wave of nausea washed over me, the void around me swirling and distorting. I realized then that I hadn't escaped the creature. I hadn't destroyed it. I had merely entered a new stage of the nightmare. What are you?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. The doppelganger smiled, a chilling expression that stretched its features into a grotesque mask. "I am you, Elias," it said, its voice a perfect imitation of my own, yet somehow wrong. "I am the part of you that you have always denied, the part of you that embraces the darkness." "That's not true," I protested, but my voice lacked conviction. The creature was playing with me, manipulating my fears, twisting my perceptions. "Is it not?" the doppelganger countered, tilting its head in a gesture that was unnervingly familiar. "You came to Kepler-62e seeking power, seeking knowledge. You were willing to risk everything for a chance at fortune. That is not the act of a selfless man, Elias. That is the act of a desperate soul." Its words struck a chord, resonating with the doubts and insecurities that I had tried so hard to bury. The creature knew me better than I knew myself. I was just trying to survive," I said, my voice weakening. "Survival is a choice, Elias," the doppelganger said, taking a step closer. "And you have chosen the path of darkness. Now it is time to embrace your destiny." It reached out a hand, its fingers long and slender, its touch promising both power and corruption. "Join me, Elias," it whispered. "Together we can rule this galaxy. Together we can become gods." I recoiled from its touch, my instincts screaming at me to reject its offer. But a part of me, a dark, twisted part of me, was drawn to its power, to its promise of control. I don't want that," I said, but my voice wavered. The doppelganger sighed, its expression shifting from amusement to disappointment. "You disappoint me, Elias," it said. "I thought you were stronger than this. I thought you were ready to embrace your true potential." It withdrew its hand, its eyes hardening with resolve. "But perhaps you are not meant to rule," it said. "Perhaps you are meant to serve." It snapped its fingers and the void around me dissolved, replaced by the familiar yet warped corridors of Kepler-62e. The station was still collapsing, the walls groaning and creaking, the ceiling threatening to cave in at any moment. But something was different. The corrupted humans were gone. The organic growth was gone. The creature's presence was gone. The station was clean. But it was a false cleanliness, a deceptive illusion. The air was thick with a sense of unease, a feeling that something was lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to strike. "Welcome to your new reality, Elias," the doppelganger said, its voice echoing through the station. "Here you will serve me. Here you will help me prepare for the coming dawn." It gestured and the station began to shift and change, its architecture twisting into bizarre, impossible angles. The corridors lengthened, the ceilings lowered, the walls closed in. The station was becoming a prison, a labyrinth designed to disorient and trap. Where are you going?" I asked, my voice filled with dread. The doppelganger smiled, a chilling expression that sent shivers down my spine. "I am going to prepare the way, Elias," it said. "I am going to spread the infection to other worlds, and you are going to help me." It vanished, its laughter echoing through the station, leaving me alone in the twisted labyrinth of my new reality. I was trapped, I was enslaved, I was doomed. Or was I? I looked around the corridor, my eyes scanning the walls for any sign of hope, and then I saw it. A small, almost imperceptible crack in the wall, hidden behind a twisted metal beam. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. I approached the crack, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to reach it before the station completely transformed, before the doppelganger returned to claim me. But as I reached the crack, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A scraping, slithering sound, coming from the darkness behind me. I turned around, my plasma cutter raised, my heart leaping into my throat. Standing at the end of the corridor, its eyes gleaming in the darkness, was something that made my skin crawl. It was a worm. A giant worm, its body covered in the same. Chapter 10: The Worm's Embrace. The monstrous worm that emerged from the shadows was a creature of pure, unadulterated revulsion. Its segmented body, thick as a cargo container, rippled with unnatural muscle, its glistening hide slick with a viscous slime that seemed to corrode the very air around it. A gaping maw, lined with rows upon rows of razor-sharp teeth, dominated its head, pulsing with a hunger that chilled me to the bone. This was no ordinary worm. This was a bioengineered horror, a product of the twisted experiments that had once been conducted on Kepler-62e, now warped and amplified by the creature's corrupting influence. Another guardian, the doppelganger's voice echoed in my mind, distant yet menacing. Prove your worth, Elias. Show me that you are not entirely useless. The worm lunged, its massive body undulating with surprising speed, its gaping maw aimed directly at me. The air rushed from my lungs, replaced by a suffocating wave of terror. I had to act and fast. I sidestepped the initial attack, narrowly avoiding being swallowed whole by the monstrous maw. The worm crashed into the wall behind me, the impact shaking the station and sending debris raining down around me. I scrambled to my feet, my plasma cutter raised, my mind racing. I couldn't fight this thing head-on. It was too big, too strong, too disgusting. I needed to find a weakness, a way to exploit its vulnerabilities. I remembered the ventilation shafts, the narrow tunnels that crisscrossed the station. If I could lure the worm into one of those, I might be able to trap it, or at least slow it down. I turned and ran, sprinting down the corridor, the worm hot on my heels, its massive body shaking the station with every movement. I could feel its hot, fetid breath on my neck, the stench of decay filling my nostrils. I reached a junction, the entrance to a ventilation shaft barely visible in the shadows. I dove inside, squeezing through the narrow opening, my body scraping against the rough metal. The worm followed, its massive head crashing into the entrance, the ventilation shaft groaning under the strain. It was too big to fit inside, but it wasn't giving up. I crawled forward, deeper into the ventilation shaft, my heart pounding in my chest. The worm was still trying to force its way inside, its massive body thrashing and convulsing, its teeth gnashing against the metal. The ventilation shaft was collapsing around me, the walls buckling and cracking, the ceiling threatening to cave in. I had to find a way out and fast. I reached a T-junction, the path ahead splitting into two different directions. I hesitated for a moment, trying to decide which way to go. And then I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A clicking, scuttling sound, coming from the darkness ahead. Spiders! I had stumbled into another spider's lair, trapped between a monstrous worm and a horde of arachnid horrors. The ventilation shaft was becoming a death trap. I had to choose, worm or spiders. Desperate, I looked around for an alternative and noticed that one of the ventilation shaft walls was old and rusted. It looked like I might be able to break through. I had to take the chance. I turned and started kicking at the wall, trying to break through. It was slow going. Suddenly, the worm broke through into the ventilation shaft behind me, and its gaping maw filled the tunnel. I redoubled my efforts, kicking as hard as I could. Finally, the rusted wall gave way, and I tumbled out of the ventilation shaft and landed on the floor of what appeared to be a storage room. I scrambled to my feet and slammed the door behind me, just as the worm tried to follow. The door wouldn't hold for long, but it would buy me some time. I looked around the storage room and my heart sank. It was filled with nothing but empty crates and rusted machinery. There was no way out. I was trapped. And then I heard the spiders. They were coming. Chapter 11, Trapped in Decay. The storage room, once a place of mundane utility, now felt like a tomb closing in. The air hung heavy with the mingled scents of rust, decay, and the faint, cloying sweetness of the organic growth that still clung to the edges of the room like a stubborn parasite. The door groaned ominously, buckling under the relentless assault of the monstrous worm, and from the shadows, the clicking and skittering of the spiders grew louder, closer. I was caught between two nightmares, with no escape in sight. My plasma cutter, once a symbol of hope and defiance, now felt like a useless trinket in the face of such overwhelming horror. Despair threatened to consume me, to paralyze me with the certainty of my impending doom. But I couldn't give in. Not yet. Not while there was still a flicker of hope, a sliver of a chance. I forced myself to focus, to ignore the pounding of the worm on the door and the creeping dread of the spiders. I scanned the room, my eyes darting from one object to another, searching for anything that could give me an edge, anything that could help me survive. And then I saw it. Tucked away in a dark corner, half hidden beneath a pile of discarded crates, was a small metal box. Its surface was scratched and corroded, but a faded label was still visible. Emergency repair kit. It was a long shot, but it was better than nothing. I scrambled towards the box, my movements clumsy and desperate, my heart pounding in my chest. The door was splintering, the worm's massive maw about to break through, and the spiders were closing in, their clicking legs echoing in the darkness. I reached the box, my fingers fumbling with the latch. It was stuck, rusted shut. I cursed it under my breath, my frustration mounting. I didn't have time for this. I yanked at the latch with all my strength, the metal screeching in protest. Finally, it gave way, the box snapping open. I rummaged through the contents, my hands trembling, my eyes scanning the tools and supplies. Most of it was useless, broken wrenches, corroded wires, empty canisters. But then I found something that made my heart leap with hope, a small but powerful fusion welder. It was a long shot, but it was worth a try. I grabbed the welder, hefting it in my hands. It was heavy, unwieldy, but it was functional. I activated it, the humming whine of the energy beam a stark contrast to the cacophony of horror that surrounded me. The door finally splintered, the worm's massive head bursting through the opening, its gaping maw lunging towards me. I reacted on instinct, aiming the fusion welder at the worm's face and pulling the trigger. A beam of intense energy erupted from the welder, searing through the air and slamming into the worm's head. The worm recoiled in pain, its body convulsing, its maw snapping shut. The fusion welder was working. But the spiders were still coming. They emerged from the shadows, their 8 eyes gleaming with predatory hunger, their legs clicking and scuttling across the floor. They were smaller than the monstrous spider I had faced before, but there were dozens of them, their numbers overwhelming. I couldn't fight them all. I had to find a way to escape. And then I remembered something: the organic growth, the parasitic infection that had transformed the station and its inhabitants into grotesque parodies of life. The spiders were vulnerable to it. The fusion welder was working against the worm. Maybe it would work against the organic growth on the spiders. I turned my attention to the spiders, aiming the fusion welder at their bodies and pulling the trigger. The spiders recoiled from the heat, their chitinous bodies smoking, their movements faltering. The organic growth that covered their bodies was withering, their connection to the creature severed. I moved quickly, efficiently, using the fusion welder to eliminate the spiders one by one. It was a slow, painstaking process, but it was working. Finally, the last spider fell, its body twitching, its connection to the creature severed. The storage room was silent, the only sound the humming whine of the fusion welder and the distant pounding of the worm on the shattered door. I had survived for now. But I knew that the doppelganger was still out there, watching me, testing me, waiting for me to fail. And I knew that the worm wouldn't stay trapped for long. I had to find a way to escape this station, to escape this nightmare, before it consumed me completely. I took a deep breath, steeling my resolve. I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to let the creature win. I was going to survive. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound, a rhythmic tapping coming from the wall behind me. It was a code. Someone was trying to communicate with me. Chapter 12. The Whispers in the Walls. The rhythmic tapping on the wall was faint, almost imperceptible, but it cut through the lingering hum of the fusion welder and the distant groaning of the station like a beacon in the darkness. My heart leaped with a surge of hope. Someone else was alive. Someone else was trying to help me. I carefully set down the fusion welder, its heat dissipating into the cold air of the storage room. The door, battered and splintered, was still holding against the relentless assault of the monstrous worm, but I knew it wouldn't last for long. The spiders were gone, their threat neutralized, but the lingering presence of the doppelganger hung heavy in the air, a silent promise of further torment. I moved closer to the wall, pressing my ear against the cold metal. The tapping continued, a steady, deliberate rhythm that seemed to follow a pattern. It was Morse code. I knew enough Morse code to decipher a simple message. I concentrated, straining to hear the faint taps, translating them in my mind. Help please break, the message read. My heart pounded in my chest. Someone was trapped on the other side of the wall and they needed my help to break through. But why? And who was it? I had to take the chance. Whoever was on the other side might have information, might have a way to escape the station. I grabbed the fusion welder, its weight reassuring in my hand. I aimed the energy beam at the wall, focusing on the area where the tapping was coming from. The wall was thick, reinforced with metal plating, but the fusion welder was powerful. The energy beam sizzled and burned, melting through the metal with agonizing slowness. The tapping continued, growing more urgent, more frantic. The worm was still pounding on the door, its massive body shaking the storage room with every impact, and the lingering presence of the doppelganger seemed to intensify, a silent threat looming over me. I ignored the danger, focusing all my energy on the wall. The metal glowed red-hot, then orange, then white. Finally, with a deafening screech, it gave way, collapsing inwards and creating a hole just large enough to squeeze through. I peered through the opening, my heart pounding in my chest. On the other side was a narrow, dimly lit corridor, and standing at the end of the corridor, their face pale and drawn, their eyes wide with relief, was a child. A young girl no older than 10, her hair matted and tangled, her clothes torn and stained. She was clutching a small metal doll, its surface scratched and dented, its eyes missing. You came," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I thought I was going to die." "Who are you?" I asked, my voice filled with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" The girl hesitated, her eyes darting nervously around the corridor. "My name is Anya," she said. I used to live here with my parents." "What happened to them?" I asked, dread creeping into my voice. Anya's eyes filled with tears. They're gone," she said. The monsters took them, they took everyone." The monsters, the corrupted humans, the spiders, the worm, the creatures that roamed the station, driven by the creature's insatiable hunger. Anya was a survivor, a lost lamb in a den of wolves. How had she managed to survive this long? "Come on," I said, my voice softening. "We have to get out of here, it's not safe." I reached out a hand, offering to help her through the opening. Anya hesitated for a moment, then took my hand, her fingers small and frail in my grasp. I pulled her through the opening, gently lowering her to the floor of the storage room. She stumbled for a moment, then regained her balance, clutching her metal doll tightly in her arms. The door finally gave way, splintering into pieces and revealing the monstrous worm, its gaping maw lunging towards us. I raised my fusion welder, preparing to defend Anya from the monster. But then something unexpected happened. Anya stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the worm, her expression calm and resolute. "Leave us alone," she said, her voice surprisingly strong for such a small child. "You are not welcome here." The worm hesitated, its movements faltering, its gaping maw closing. It seemed to be afraid of Anya. And then it turned and slithered away, disappearing into the darkness. I stared at Anya in disbelief. How had she done that? How had she managed to scare away such a monstrous creature? Anya turned to me, her eyes filled with a sadness that belied her age. "They don't like me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They can feel what I am." What was Anya? What was her connection to the creatures that roamed this station? And what did she mean by what I am? I had a feeling I was about to find out. Chapter 13. The Girl and the Gift. Anya's words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. What was she? A survivor, yes, but clearly something more. Her calm demeanor in the face of such horrific creatures, the way the worm had recoiled at her presence, it all pointed to something extraordinary, something unnatural. "What do you mean, they can feel what you are?" I asked, my voice cautious, my mind racing with possibilities. Anya hesitated, her gaze shifting from me to the metal doll clutched in her arms. She seemed hesitant to answer, as if revealing her secret would somehow put us both in danger. I don't know exactly," she said, her voice barely audible above the distant groaning of the station. "But I can feel them too. I can feel what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and they don't like it." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. "It's like I'm a broken mirror. They see themselves in me, but it's not right, it's wrong, and it scares them." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. Anya was an empath, able to sense the thoughts and emotions of the creatures that roamed the station. But it was more than that. She was a repellent, a living embodiment of something that they found fundamentally disturbing, something that disrupted their corrupted nature. That's how she had survived. Not by hiding, not by fighting, but by simply being. By existing as a force that the creatures couldn't comprehend, couldn't tolerate. But what did that mean for us? Could she help us escape? Or would her presence simply attract more attention, more danger? Can you feel the creature?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The one that's controlling everything." Anya nodded, her face growing pale. "Yes," she said, it's always there. A dark, twisted presence watching everything, feeling everything. It knows we're here." Can you find a weakness?" I pressed, my hope rising. "Can you find a way to stop it?" Anya closed her eyes, her face contorting in concentration. She stood there for a long moment, her body swaying slightly, as if she were struggling against some unseen force. Finally, she opened her eyes, her gaze filled with a mixture of hope and despair. "I can feel a source," she said, "a place where its power is strongest. It's deep within the station, in the core." The core, that's where I had initiated the reactor scramble sequence. That's where the doppelganger was heading. That's where we had to go. "Can you lead us there?" I asked, my voice filled with determination. Anya nodded, her gaze hardening with resolve. "Yes," she said, "but it's dangerous. The station is changing. The creature is trying to trap us, and I can feel another presence. Something stronger, something closer. The doppelganger, it was coming for us. We had to move, now." "Lead the way," I said, grabbing my fusion welder and gesturing towards the shattered doorway. "Let's get out of here." Anya took a deep breath, clutching her metal doll tightly in her arms, and stepped into the corridor. I followed close behind, my senses on high alert, my plasma cutter raised, ready for anything. The corridor was dark and twisted, the walls pulsating with faint, organic growth. The air hung heavy with a sense of unease, a feeling that we were being watched. Anya moved with a surprising confidence, her small feet silent on the metal floor. She seemed to know where she was going, as if she were being guided by some unseen force. We navigated the labyrinthine corridors, avoiding collapsed sections and grotesque manifestations of the infection. The station was changing, its architecture shifting and twisting, trying to disorient us, to trap us. But Anya remained steadfast, her gaze focused, her determination unwavering. She was our guide, our compass, our only hope of surviving this nightmare. As we rounded a corner, we saw something that made our blood run cold. Standing at the end of the corridor, its form shimmering and distorted, its eyes burning with an unholy light, was the doppelganger. It was waiting for us. Chapter 14. The Doppelganger's Gambit. The doppelganger stood before us, a shimmering mirage of my own face, yet twisted into a cruel parody of humanity. Its eyes, burning with malevolent intelligence, were fixed on Anya, a predatory gleam dancing within their depths. The air crackled with palpable energy, the station itself seeming to hold its breath, anticipating the confrontation. So the doppelganger's voice echoed, a chillingly familiar timbre that sent shivers down my spine. "You found yourself a little friend. How touching." Its gaze shifted from Anya to me, a flicker of amusement crossing its features. "I must admit, Elias, I'm disappointed. I expected more from you. I thought you were ready to embrace your destiny, but instead you choose to cling to sentimentality, to weakness." I tightened my grip on the fusion welder, my knuckles turning white. "She's not a weakness," I said, my voice defiant despite the fear that gnawed at my insides. "She's the only reason I'm still fighting." The doppelganger chuckled, a dry, rattling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Is that so?" it said, its gaze returning to Anya. "Then perhaps I should remove her from the equation." It took a step forward, its movements fluid and unnatural, its presence radiating a sense of overwhelming power. Anya flinched, clutching her metal doll tighter, but she stood her ground, her gaze fixed on the doppelganger. "Leave her alone," I said, my voice rising. "She's done nothing to you." "She is an obstacle, Elias," the doppelganger said, its voice hardening. "She is preventing you from embracing your true potential. She must be eliminated." It raised a hand, its fingers elongated and sharpened into claws, and prepared to strike. But then something unexpected happened. Anya stepped forward, placing herself between me and the doppelganger. Her eyes, usually filled with a quiet sadness, now burned with a fierce determination. "You will not hurt him," she said, her voice surprisingly strong for such a small child. "I will not allow it." The doppelganger paused, its expression shifting from amusement to curiosity. "Such defiance," it said, its voice laced with mockery. "You truly believe you can protect him? You are nothing but a child, a broken toy. You are no match for me." "I may be small," Anya said, her voice unwavering, "but I am not powerless. I know what you are, I know what you fear." The doppelganger hesitated, its eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" it said, its voice suddenly cautious. Anya took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the doppelganger, her voice ringing with power. "You are afraid of what you cannot control," she said. "You are afraid of the light that still flickers within you. You are afraid of being alone." Her words struck a chord, resonating with the doppelganger's inner darkness. Its form flickered and distorted, its eyes widening with a mixture of rage and fear. "Silence," it roared, its voice filled with desperation. "You know nothing." It lunged, its clawed hand reaching for Anya's throat. I reacted on instinct, leaping forward and shoving Anya out of the way. The doppelganger's claws missed their target, slashing through the air where Anya had been standing. I raised my fusion welder, aiming it at the doppelganger's face and pulling the trigger. A beam of intense energy erupted from the welder, searing through the air and slamming into the doppelganger's head. The doppelganger screamed, its form convulsing, its body dissolving into a cloud of smoke and energy. It was gone. For a moment the corridor was silent, the only sound the humming whine of the fusion welder and the distant groaning of the station. Had we won? Had we finally defeated the creature? But then I realized something. The air was growing colder, the shadows were growing deeper, and the station itself was beginning to tremble. The doppelganger was gone, but the creature was still alive, and it was angry. We had to get to the core, now. I grabbed Anya's hand, my heart pounding in my chest. "Come on," I said, my voice urgent. "It's not over yet." Anya nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination, and we ran down the corridor, deeper into the heart of the station, towards the source of the darkness, towards the final confrontation. As we ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the station itself was alive, and that it was waiting for us to make our final mistake. Chapter 15: The Core. The journey to the core was a descent into madness. The station contorted around us, corridors shifting into impossible angles, gravity fluctuating with disorienting randomness. The organic growth pulsed with malevolent energy, its tendrils reaching out to ensnare us, to drag us into the station's corrupted embrace. The air grew thick with the stench of decay and the metallic tang of fear. But Anya remained our unwavering guide, her small hand gripping mine, her eyes fixed on some unseen destination. She seemed to sense the shifts in the station's architecture, to anticipate the creature's traps, her presence a shield against the encroaching darkness. We encountered remnants of the station's previous horrors, mutated creatures that scuttled in the shadows, their eyes burning with predatory hunger, corrupted humans, their faces twisted into grotesque masks of pain, and echoes of the past, ghostly apparitions of the crew, reliving their final moments of terror. Each encounter chipped away at my resolve, testing my sanity, threatening to break me. But Anya's strength, her unwavering belief in our mission, kept me going. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached our destination, the core. It was a massive, cylindrical chamber, its walls lined with complex machinery, its floor pulsing with an ominous red glow. The air crackled with raw energy, the temperature scorching, the silence broken only by the rhythmic hum of the reactor. In the center of the chamber, suspended in a swirling vortex of crimson energy, was the creature. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was no longer confined to a single form, no longer bound by the laws of physics. It was a swirling mass of energy, a vortex of darkness, a living embodiment of chaos and destruction. Its presence filled the chamber, overwhelming my senses, stealing my breath. I could feel its power, its rage, its insatiable hunger. It knew we were here. It was waiting for us. "Welcome, Elias," its voice echoed in my mind, a chorus of whispers that spoke from every corner of my consciousness. "I have been expecting you." It turned its attention to Anya, its energy swirling around her, probing her, testing her. "And you," it said, its voice laced with curiosity. "What are you? What is this power that you possess?" Anya stood her ground, her eyes fixed on the creature, her face resolute. "I am hope," she said, her voice ringing with power. "I am the light that will banish your darkness." The creature laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Hope is a lie, child," it said. "There is only darkness, there is only despair, and you are about to become a part of it." It unleashed its power, sending a wave of crimson energy crashing towards us. I raised my fusion welder, preparing to defend Anya, but it was too late. The energy washed over us, engulfing us in darkness. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the end. But it never came. Instead, I felt a strange sensation, a feeling of warmth, of peace. The creature's presence was receding, its power diminishing, its voice fading into the distance. I opened my eyes and I saw light. A brilliant, blinding light emanating from Anya. She was glowing, her body radiating a pure white energy that pushed back the darkness, that cleansed the corruption, that banished the creature's influence. The station was changing. The organic growth was withering, the twisted architecture was returning to normal, the oppressive atmosphere was lifting. The creature's power was fading. It roared in fury, unleashing its full power trying to extinguish Anya's light. But it was too late. Anya's light grew brighter, stronger, more intense. It enveloped the creature, consuming it, destroying it. And then it was gone. The chamber was silent, the only sound the rhythmic hum of the reactor. The red glow on the floor faded, replaced by a soft, white light. The station was clean, pure, free from the creature's influence. We had won, we had defeated the creature, we had saved the station. But at what cost? Anya stood before me, her body still glowing, her eyes filled with a serene light. But something was different. She was fading. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice filled with dread. Anya smiled, a gentle, peaceful expression. "It's over," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I've done what I had to do." "But where are you going?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. Anya reached out a hand, touching my cheek, her touch warm and comforting. "I'm going home," she said. "I'm going to be with my parents." Her light grew brighter, her form becoming more transparent. "Thank you, Elias," she said, her voice fading. "You helped me save this station, you gave me hope, and you showed me that I wasn't alone." And then she was gone. The light faded, the chamber was silent, and I was left alone, standing in the heart of the station, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, the echoes of the present, and the hope for the future. I had survived, I had escaped, but I would never be the same. I had faced the darkness, and I had found the light. But I had also learned that the greatest horrors are not always the monsters that lurk in the shadows, but the darkness that resides within ourselves. I left Kepler-62e a changed man. The Stardust Drifter carried me away from that cursed station, but the memories, the horrors, the sacrifices would forever remain etched into my soul. I never returned to scavenging. The lure of fortune and glory had lost its appeal. Instead, I dedicated my life to helping others, to protecting the innocent, to fighting against the darkness that still lurked in the galaxy. I became a guardian, a protector, a beacon of hope in a universe filled with despair. And I carried Anya's memory with me always, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, even in the face of unimaginable horror, there is always light to be found. The end.